Okay. Yeah, so is there anyone coming in? I'm gonna start around 9:05 probably. Um, yeah, if you're joining this workshop, we'll start around 9:05. Um, you only need two things to follow along. So one of them is Node.js. The other is an account on MongoDB. So you can Google for both of these. Downloading Node.js should take like 30 seconds, and same with creating an account on MongoDB. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat. I think you can also use this Slido to ask any questions, and we'll be watching the chat throughout the workshop. Yeah, so I'll start in about 30 seconds. If you'd like to follow along today, you can download just two things, or one thing is Node.js, and then the other is create a free account um, on MongoDB. So both of these are free. It should take less than 1 minute to get set up. And yeah, I think we'll get started. So presenter mode. So yeah, today I'll be giving a quick intro to Next.js with a focus on building your front end and your back end together in a single code base. Quick intro before we get started to myself. So my name is Jeff. I just graduated from U Waterloo in 2021 from computer engineering, and I'm currently working full time as a full stack engineer at a startup called Spatial. You can follow me on GitHub or Instagram. In my free time, I like traveling, trying new food, and watching a lot of sports. This workshop is geared towards all skill levels. It will help if you're familiar with some technologies like HTML and JavaScript, but it is not necessary to follow along. So today, here's a quick overview of what I'll be going over. I'm going to give a quick intro to what Next.js is. Maybe this says 30 minutes or probably closer to 10 or 20. And then the bulk of the workshop will be a code-along style where we'll be building an app together. We'll actually be building a very simple Airbnb clone. So that'll be fun. We'll be using Next.js to build this app. And then Q&A at the end or just throughout the entire workshop. Yeah, and again, if you're just joining now, you'll need Node.js installed on your computer, as well as a free account on MongoDB. And so just before we get into the workshop, if you would like to follow along and code along, which is not necessary, you can also just watch. But if you want to follow along, we are going to go to MongoDB, which I have open right here. And I'm just going to create a new project because this will actually take a while. So I'm going to name this project Hat to North Intro to Next.js. You can name it whatever you like. And we're just going to skip through all of these steps and click build a database, free. Just skip through all of it and click create. So this is going to take like a couple of minutes. So we'll let that run in the background and let's get started. So Next.js, if you go to the Next.js website, they call themselves the React framework for production, which honestly isn't that descriptive, doesn't really tell you anything. And then if you scroll down, they have all of these reasons that tell you why Next.js is really cool, image optimization, server-side rendering, static site generation, internationalization. So like kind of a lot of buzzwords, a lot of fancy sounding things that might not be too applicable to you, especially during a hackathon. But one of the key features that we'll actually be focusing in on today is something that Next.js calls API routes. And what API routes lets you essentially do is it lets you build your front end and your back end in a single application. So the front end, as you might have guessed, is going to be in React, which is a very popular JavaScript library. And then the back end is also going to be built in JavaScript or TypeScript with what they call API routes. So this is kind of just a small feature, not really a small feature, but one of the features that Next.js offers, and it's going to be what we're focusing in on today. But as you can see, this is a pretty big framework that has all sorts of different features to really create, as they call it, a production grade web application. So yeah, you can see Next.js, it's famous for kind of all of these things. It's very popular in the industry today, but we're going to be focusing in on something that they call API routes. And yeah, bonus points to learning Next.js, aside from just being really useful and interesting like framework, it is, it's very hot, very popular in the industry. I think a lot of companies are migrating to Next.js, or if you're starting up a new project, it's kind of the top choice right now. It has like kind of all of the common popular technologies, React, it's serverless, it does server-side rendering, TypeScript, API routes. So learning Next.js can also, I guess, help you get a job. And it's just a really cool framework to learn. Cool. So the idea that we're going to be focusing in on today, as I've mentioned multiple times already, is the idea of writing your front end and your back end in a single code base. So when we talk about front end and back end, some of you might kind of have a general idea of what this means or how it works. And generally, how people think of it is that the front end is what the user or the person interacts with, right? So if we go to websites, you see like a video, or you see links to click on, you see images, you see text. That's like what we consider to be the front end, and that's what I interact with. And you're gonna notice here, I called my front end, my blog.xyz, and it's post number 3. So I would go to this URL, and everything I see on the website is basically, it's what I'm interacting with, it's what we call like the front end. And then on the flip side, there is the idea of the backend, which is like this hidden kind of black box that you don't really see, but kind of does all of the stuff behind the scenes, like authentication, databases, like machine learning, all of this kind of stuff. It all happens like typically people call it the backend. And it's basically, one way that people put it is that it's all of the stuff that you don't see. So what's actually happening when I go to my blog.xyz is it might be actually making what are called API calls to my so-called backend to get, for example, what are the comments on this blog post? What's the actual content of the blog post? Should I show some ads? What are some related posts? Things like that. So my backend might look kind of like this. It might look like api.myblog.xyz. And when I go to this website's actually going to make an API call to this URL as well as this URL. It's basically to fetch the contents of the blog post as well as the comments. It might make other API calls to fetch advertisements, to fetch who's liked your post, things like that. So backend's kind of like storing a bunch of data. It's doing these things behind this, all this work behind the scene that you can't really see. And people like represent it as a server or just like a box, basically on a diagram or a collection of boxes. So this is like the traditional idea or separation of front end and back end. And if we go forward, kind of 2 slides forward, and I have this slide that says front end and back end with Next.js. And you're going to notice that it more or less looks exactly the same. But if you look closely, there is a slight difference, which is previously our front end, the URL still looks the same, but the backend URL, so previously it was api.myblog.xyz, which kind of denotes API is a subdomain. It's like hosted on a different machine, on a server somewhere else in the world. Your code base lives somewhere else, and it's like completely separate from your front end. And with Next.js, you're actually going to see that it's still myblog.xyz, but now just like /API, and then you put whatever route you want. And kind of the reason why we can do this is because with Next.js, it's actually all like in the same code base on the same machine. There's no like separation of code. There's no separation of servers, front end, back end. It's kind of like all in the same place. You still have your front end website, which is written in React, and you still have your back end, which is just written in Node.js, JavaScript, or TypeScript. But they all live in the same place. And this is kind of reflected in the URL structure. So when we think of like the architecture, just from a very high level, there's not much of a difference on the outside, but internally it looks pretty different because of the way that the code is actually structured. So that is kind of the core idea behind what Next.js is helping us do at a high level. And rather than kind of digging deeper into what that actually means or like how it's actually like architected or kind of like going through the documentation, we're actually just going to build an application together. I think it'll be a bit more fun to code along and kind of see us build something with Next.js because there are documentations out there for you to kind of read if you're interested. It's pretty thorough and you can learn all the details on your own, but let's build an application together. So I'm going to be referring to a GitHub repo that I created for this workshop. So if you like, you can open it up and follow along. And so what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is we are going to use a tool that they've made called Create Next App to get our application started. So I'm just going to copy, I'm actually going to use a TypeScript version. I'm going to copy this into a terminal. And so this command is basically going to create a Next.js application for us and set it all up so we don't have to do it ourselves. And I'm going to name it Have the North Next.js Workshop. And that will take a bit to run. So you can use this command to create your Next.js application. And then if you were just joining before, If you remember, we created a MongoDB database. It should be kind of provisioned by now. So there's one more step to this that's also going to take a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to do that right now. But once you're in your database, you're going to click on this cluster 0, and you're going to click on collections. So once we're in here, we're just going to load in the sample data that they provide. I'm going to click that. And again, this is going to take like another 5 minutes. So again, after you create your database for free, you're going to go to cluster 0, collections, and load the sample data set. Cool. So we're going to let that run in the background. And hopefully, if nothing went wrong, you should have a Next.js application created by now. Some happy error messages. And whoops, what I'm going to do now that it is created is I'm going to open up that folder in my code editor of choice. You can use any code editor you want. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to open up this folder. We can see like there's a bunch of files, a bunch of code already created for you to kind of help you get started. And if you read, if you read their instructions, it says just use yarn dev to get started. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to run yarn dev. And it tells me that it started up my Next.js application. I'm going to open it up. It's going to be on localhost port 3000. And this is kind of what I see when I open up my Next.js app. So this just looks like a plain old website. If you've done kind of any sort of React application or built any sort of websites, this is just a very, very plain website, with some links. But if we take a look at the code and see what's actually happening, we can see you have a bunch of folders here, and the one that really matters is the pages folder. And inside pages, if we go to index, we're going to see kind of the code that corresponds with this page here. So this is spinning up a very simple React application, which is our front end. So you can see like this says, welcome to Next.js. I'm going to change it to intro to Next.js. I'm going to save this code. And the really great thing is the moment you save it, your changes are reflected here immediately. So this is a great way to get started. Even if you're like not interested in Next.js at all and you're just interested in React, this is a great way to like learn React and play around. Pretty much takes 1 minute and you have a full-fledged React application that you can play around with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete kind of all of this extra junk and save. And you can see our website updates instantly, right? And I can say this says powered by Vercel, which is a company that created Next.js. I can say created by me. And you can update this link to my GitHub. I will update it to this repo. And yeah, and you can see the changes apply automatically. So cool. So we have this is the front end side of the application. This might look familiar if you've used React at all, or if you haven't, well, this is pretty straightforward to get started. If you're interested in learning React, you can kind of write code here and it immediately gets reflected in your web browser. But like I've been talking about, one of the main selling points of Next.js is the ability to write your backend in the same place, right? So typically what you might do is you might have another code base that's hat north workshop backend, and it's going to be like some sort of server. You're going to start that server. It'll be on localhost 8000 or 8080 or something like that. And you write some backend code, and then you'll have your front end call your backend, and so on. But this gets pretty complicated because you're doing hackathon or you're doing a side project, and so it's not just you, it's your friend is also working on the back end. So now like he has to push their code and you have to pull that code and run it on your machine, and it's pretty annoying. So instead, this is going to let us do everything in one code base. So if you go back to the code, we had pages, index, This is like our homepage for the front end. And then there's this folder called API. And everything in the API, we can actually just think of basically our backend. And this is the API routes that I talked about before. So if I go, there's just a single file called hello. And in this file, it's basically just a single function that returns, some data. Let's say it says somebody's name is John. So if I actually go to call this API, so the route is going to be /API/hello. So I'm actually going to try that out. So I'm going to make a request to localhost 3000, and I'm going to go /API/hello. And this is basically making an API call to this endpoint. Click send, and you can see that the response is an object with the key name, and the response is John Doe. So, I can change this. So maybe I don't want it to say this. I wanted to say intro to Next.js. Hit save and click send. And you can see it's immediately updated. So this is kind of like your classic backend with you're building an API. You have some endpoints you want to build, and then your front end is going to call that endpoint to get some data, so on and so forth. So you can see we have the front end, we have kind of our backends, all in one place, all on localhost 3000. So before I keep going, can you show how to create a Next.js application again? Yep. So what I did was I searched for create Next app on Google. And yeah, I'll just preface this by saying it would be great if you can follow along, but also all the code will be online. So if I go a bit fast, I think I'll also just be like copy pasting code in and going pretty fast. So don't feel too concerned if you kind of just watch. I think you'll learn a lot. But this is the exact command I run. I think I ran this one. If you can also try running this one in your terminal. So you would run create next app, and then they would ask you to name your project. You would name it, and it would run the script. And after running the script, I opened up the folder in my code editor. So hopefully that helps. Cool. All right. So let's build something. So I'll actually show everyone kind of what I'm going to build today, which is basically a super simple I'm calling it an Airbnb clone. It's not going to actually work, but it kind of looks like a website that lists homes for rent. So we're going to actually build something that looks like this, and we are starting with obviously an empty slate. So the first thing I did was, load sample data sets. Okay, yeah, this is done. So MongoDB, you don't have to really worry about what this is, but it's essentially a free online database. Most applications have something called a database, which is just where you store data. And what I did is I created a database, and then I filled it up with some sample data. They actually provide sample Airbnb, sample analytics, weather, things like that, just so that we have something to work with and we're not it's not completely empty. So what I'm going to do is, if you want to follow along, you're going to have to basically allow access to the database that you created. So there's two things you have to do. One is allowing IP address access. So I'm just going to allow access from my current IP. You can also allow access from anywhere if that's easier, but I'm going to do my current IP address. And then the other thing you have to do is basically create a user. So this is, you can call this user the admin user, and I'm gonna just give it a password. I'll show you it's okay. Next workshop. and create the user. Okay, so once we've done that, we are ready to go. And cool. Okay. So what I'm going to try and do first is, I'm going to create, I want to create a endpoint that basically gives me a listing of all of my spaces, all of my Airbnb listings, right? So I'm probably going to call this endpoint slash listings. And what I want to do is I want to go into my database, get a bunch of listings and return it, right? So let's get started in code. Let's see. Questionnaire on the MongoDB website. Cool. Yeah. So if you're trying to create the sample data, you want to click on cluster 0 and then collections and then list load the sample data. If to connect to it, we will be doing that in just a second. Yeah, there's a bunch of options. I will go through that. Don't worry. But what you want to do if you've already created your sample data is you basically want to allow access from your IP address or all IP addresses. I recommend your own IP address, as well as create a user. It doesn't matter what you name the user. It doesn't matter what your password is. Just remember the password. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, so we'll come back to Mongo. But let's create a new endpoint. So I'm gonna actually just copy and paste hello, and I'm gonna name it listing, right? And we're gonna say listings. So I've created a new file called listings. I should name it listings. And let's see what happens, right? So I'm gonna show you, like, if I go to API slash whatever, something that doesn't exist, it's going to give me some sort of error. That's obviously expected. But if I go to listings and click send, well, there you go. Like my new endpoint is kind of there. It's returning what I'm telling it to return. Great. So let's hook this up to MongoDB because we want to actually fetch our data from our database, right? All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new folder in the root of the project. I'll call it details, and I'll create a file called mondo.typescript. So in this file, I'm basically just going to create a very simple function that connects to MongoDB. If you kind of look up MongoDB getting started JavaScript or TypeScript, they'll have like a step-by-step example of how you can write code to connect to the database. And this is pretty much exactly what I'm going to be doing. So if you kind of want to dig deeper into what each line of code is doing, you can do that. But essentially, MongoDB has a library for JavaScript, and it's just named Mongo. And you can install this either using npm install Mongo. If you were using npm earlier, I think I was using Yarn, which is just a different package manager. So I'm going to do yarn add Mongo. I think it's Mongo. I don't know if it's Mongo or MongoDB. I think it's Mongo. I hope it was Mongo. Let's check what they say. Getting started. Quit start. Install node. And install MongoDB. Okay, well, I installed the wrong dependency. That is okay. I'm just going to delete it. So hopefully you didn't do that, but if you did, it's okay. You can go to your package.json, delete it, and we're going to go yarn add MongoDB. Check if there's questions. Cool. So again, it's npm install MongoDB or yarn add MongoDB. That just adds this, basically this library for interfacing with MongoDB. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to copy over kind of my code, and I will kind of go through it. So there's about 50 lines of code in here, and pretty much it's just straight up copying, kind of not straight up copying, but for the most part, it's what is in the MongoDB getting started guide. It's essentially saying connect to MongoDB and then return a client. And with this client, I can access data on my database. Now one thing I want to mention here is that you might be thinking like, well, why don't I just go straight from my front end to fetch the data from the database? And kind of like traditionally, one of the whole points of having a backend is that your backend is like secure and it's hidden behind a box, and no one has like secrets, has passwords that no one can access. And this is exactly the case with Next.js as well. So everything in API is going to be using like private information. So only your backend can talk to your database. You can't just like let anyone access this data and change it. So once again, I copied over from my repo utils mongo.ts, and kind of the important things is it has a function called connect to Mongo, which we will be using, and it's also getting the Mongo URL and database from what is called like environment variables, which is basically secret information that is not exposed anywhere aside from your server. So to get this information, we are going to create another new file called .env.local. And this file is going to live, again, in the root of our project. So it's called .env.local. And in it, I actually have this example file in my repo. It's .env.local.example. So I'm going to copy this into here. You don't have to change this third line, but we are going to change this one. So this is how we know how to connect to MongoDB, which is a database somewhere in the cloud. It's storing our data for us. So we're going to need our username here, which I put my username as admin. And then we're going to need our password, which I think our password was this, I hope. And then it's going to need a URL. So to get this URL, there's a question earlier on how to get it, I think. So we're going to go back to Mongo. We're going to click connect to your application. And you can see they have this exact same string here. So this URL, it will probably look very similar for you. I think the only thing that will change is this guy in the middle. So mine is VCO3J. I'm just going to copy that in here. And then everything else I'm going to leave the same. So it should be some sort of string like this. Again, it's going to be your username, password, whatever kind of string they give you over there, and then sample Airbnb, and nothing else has to be changed. So you're going to notice, just again, I want to point out that this file is actually like not being pushed to GitHub. It's kind of like, you can see it's grayed out in my editor. So this is like a secret file that you would only have on your local machine, as well as like wherever you're hosting this application, it's going to be only on that machine, so that like not anyone, because basically with this string, anyone can go access your database and do whatever they want. So this is like basically your secret file. So hopefully some people are still following along, but we are making great progress. So once all of this is set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart my Next.js application because I've changed some environment variables. So we actually have to restart our app. So I'm going to hit Control-C, and I'm going to run yarn dev again. Cool. And it will look like nothing has changed. I can still go to my site. Refresh. Okay, that was really fast. I can still go here, and I'm still getting listings. Cool. But let's actually implement this listing. So a lot of work to kind of get connected to MongoDB, but now we will be able to use it. So what we're essentially going to do is we are going to import, and I'm going to try to write as much of this code as can without looking at the code I wrote previously. But I'm going to import from this file that I just wrote, which was utils Mondo, I'm going to import the function to connect to Mondo. So let's go ahead and import that. And I'll just go. I can't find, oh, I didn't write from. So we're gonna import it. Cool. And then in our handler, so we're actually gonna make this a async function. And in our handler here, before we return anything, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say const Mondo equals awaits connect to Mondo. So first, we got to connect to Mondo. And then once we do that, we can use our Mondo client. So this is the Mondo client. We can use that to do whatever we want with the database. So let me see what the code is. It's going to be some sort of query. It's kind of long. So pages, API, listings. And let's copy this in. So listings and reviews, we don't have to worry about this. But basically what I'm saying is, okay, so I have a function called get all listings, which we're going to do Mondo. First, they have a notion of collections, which is listings and reviews. We're going to try and find like basically all of the data in the collection. We're going to limit it to just 100 entries. Otherwise, there would be just way too much data and convert it to an array. So this is just kind of doing some Mondo stuff, Mondo specific. Again, you can also like Google how to do this. It's not really too important for a use case because we're worried about Next.js. But this is just typical like backend code you might write when you're creating an API and getting some data. And let's see if I did everything else right. Yep, almost. So I think I like this. And then, so there's actually just basically 2 lines of code here. First, connect to Mondo, then get all the listings using this function I wrote. And then what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to return all of my listings. All right. And it is complaining because I'm using TypeScript. So it was expecting a name, and I'm going to return an array of just any objects. Cool. So again, you can just copy if you copy and paste this code. It's pages API listings.ts straight into your code editor. If you like, this is basically exactly what I have, but just to explain it just a little bit, we connect to Mondo, get a bunch of data, and then we're going to return that data. And all right, so I save my code. Fingers crossed this is going to work. If I go back over here and hit send. All right, so let's take a look at what we have. So you can actually see, first of all, that I have listings is an array, a really big array. And then it's an array of objects, and each object represents an Airbnb listing. So this was filled out from the sample data sets in MongoDB. So, a listing has a URL, has a name, summary, description, photos, reviews, et cetera, like a ton of data. And great. So now we actually have a backend that is getting a bunch of listings from a database, some database, and we have an endpoint that is returning it for us. Cool. And let me know if anyone has any questions. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So if you're following along, I can try and help you debug. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going because what we want to do now is take this data and kind of put it into a beautiful web page for everyone to see. So again, if you were doing this traditionally without Next.js, your friend might have written this code on a server, and then they would kind of like push this code onto GitHub, and then you would pull it onto your machine because you're doing the front end. You would have to figure out how to run that server, and then how to figure out how to run your front end at the same time, and like make an API call to that server to get the data. Probably, you have to create this env logo file, of course, because you can't expose these credentials. So it's kind of just an extra step. that we're saving. And if you change your backends, you can immediately change the front end at the same time. You can have one of your friends work on listings, one of your friends work on payments or reviews or design or whatever it is, kind of like asynchronously, and you don't really have this issue of like pushing and pulling from different repositories. So that's just some of the inspiration behind Next.js. But let's keep going. So I have kind of this endpoints / listings that's giving me a bunch of data. And let's do something cool with it on our front end. So I had my front end. It looked like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a link to a new page. So I'm going to go link. And I'm going to call it / listings on the front end as well. See all listings. And this star has to be imported from Next. I don't know why it's not doing it automatically, but it's linked from Next / link. So this is basically to create a link in Next.js on the front end. I'm going to save that. And all right, I have this link, see all listings. And when I click it, it is going to bring me to this page, just / listings. So it's not /API / listings. It just / listings on my front end. And it says this page cannot be found because we haven't created it yet. So we're going to create a new page. And then to do that, it's pretty simple. You also just name your page exactly what you'd like. So I want my page to be / listings. So I'm going to name the file listings. I'm going to copy over all of this into here, and I'll just change a bit of it so we can see that something changed. And now, great. So I have a listings page. So I can go back, click see all listings, and it brings me to the listings page. And this is the page we're going to use to fetch all of our listings from the backend and then render it really nicely. So once again, Next.js is built on React. React is built in, and you have to use it, which is great if you've used React before or you want to learn it. It's the most popular front end UI library. There's not a workshop on React. I know there's some incredible workshops on React already. So we're not going to be going over the exercise of creating components and styling them and whatnot. Fortunately, that code is already written. But I'm just going to be showing you kind of this is how you would create a new page in Next.js. And then, it's built on React. So anything you want to do in React normally, you can do in Next.js. So if I was going to create this component, just kind of walking through my kind of thought process, right? First, I would want to create a component for every single listing. I would call it like a listing card. And I just have like 100 listings, so I'll have 100 listing cards on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder here called components, and we'll move that to the roots, and I'll create a component called listing card. And in this card, it's basically we'll kind of go through it just really quickly. So you can see it shows an image, which is the listings image. It shows if the host is a superhost. It shows the address. It shows, I don't know what this here. It shows the address. It shows verified. It shows the price, the rating, kind of just is in. The listing comes, of course, from our API, and then we're just gonna render it on the page. And again, actually, to help me build this, kind of just show you that because this is built on React, you can use whatever libraries you want. If you don't feel like building out a UI from scratch and writing all the CSS, I have some libraries that I personally really like. One of them is called Chakra UI, another is called React Icons. So again, I'm going to actually just add both of these. I think Chakra UI install is a bit more complicated, but I ran yarn add React Icons. And I'm also going to run this command, yarn add all this. These are just component libraries, styling libraries to make my life easier when I was building this. And of course, I would recommend too, for the purpose of a hackathon, make your life easier by finding a component library that you like and using it to your advantage, making your app super pretty. So I'm gonna let that install. And all right, is it complaining about anything else? Nope, looks like we are good. So I have a component called listing card. And what I'm gonna do is I am now gonna go back to listings and fetch all of our listings. So again, if you've used React, you might kind of have seen this before. Otherwise, I will quickly explain it. Oh, and I'm gonna install one more library, which is called Axios. It makes fetching data much easier. So it's yarn at Axios. All right. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go axios.get/listings. So again, here we don't have to say localhosts 3000 or 8000 or api.mypage.com/listings. I can literally just do /API/listings. So I'm gonna say, hey, like please fetch this data, and then once it's fetched, we are gonna put it in our state. So we're gonna need a state. Let me make sure I'm doing everything correctly. Yeah, so we're gonna create a state variable called listings, and we're gonna get our data, and then we're gonna go set listings response.data.listings, I think. So fetch our data and then put it into our React state, and almost there. So let's just see what this does. So I'm gonna log this out and save, and then go to our application, open up our DevTools, and refresh our page. So you can see it starts off as empty because we haven't fetched anything yet. And then after like half a second, we have all of our listings that we are fetching from the endpoint that we just built about 10 minutes ago using Next.js. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's delete this footer. And I think I got to create a grid. Let me copy over that styling code. Yep, I have another component called listings grid. And yeah, so if we have listings from our backend, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show our listings grid. And all right, almost there. It's complaining about something. What is it complaining about? I spelled it wrong. Spelled everything wrong. Okay. And just complaining about one more thing. I didn't add the bracket. All right. And then finally, let's import this, and let's import this, which is what we just made. All right. So yeah, all we're doing is we're just creating kind of a grid layout where for every single listing from our API, we're just going to create a listing card component. So yeah, if you're familiar with React or you want to learn React, this is kind of how React is really powerful. You just create one component called listing card. You have a bunch of data, and you're just gonna, for every single piece of data, we're reusing our components and rendering on our screen, and then we're just gonna put it all inside the grid just to lay it out nicely. So let me save this and kind of let me show you what it looks like. It's gonna take a while. Oh, I think I forgot one step, so it's almost there. But yeah, as you can see, I have taken all of the listings from our API, and I've just kind of displayed them nicely on our page using React and CSS and styling. I think there's one more thing I have to do in order to use this library that I've used called Chakra. I have to go to app.css and just copy this over. So app.css and just copy this all in. Again, this is just for styling. Cool. And let me, whoa. See all listings. Whoa. All right. I don't really know what's going on over there. But yeah, I mean, there might be some small bugs, but so there we go. So we actually have, we built an API, first of all, called /listings, which as you saw, if I open it up, it returns a bunch of data that we fetch from a database. And then in that same application, 10 minutes later, or will probably take more like an hour or 2 hours, because I didn't do this in 10 minutes. I didn't, I just copied over a bunch of code that I wrote. But we are fetching, most importantly, we're fetching the data from our API that we literally just wrote. And then we're going to put all the data on the screen really nicely. And yeah. And then, from here on out, you can kind of do whatever you like. So maybe, you want a button here to say reserve this booking. Let's say we were actually building Airbnb. So then on your backend, you might have a file, a new route that's like reserve or something like that. So, you can start building out your entire application. You can build all your endpoints. You can build your front end to display the data, have buttons, make more API calls, things like that. So basically, what Next.js is letting us do is do everything all in one place. And of course, all with like super modern technologies, React, Node.js, the serverless architecture, kind of all these really cool technologies and putting them all together. So let me see if I missed any questions. Actually, before that, let me see. Well, I don't really know what I did wrong here. So I'm gonna just copy over. I think I probably forgot to delete some of the styling that came with their code. So yeah, let's slightly different. All right, yeah, there we go. Cool. So if there's any questions or we got stuck, okay, how'd you go about finding UI library? Oh, is it what's going on here? Oh, it's the same question. How'd you know it would become useful? Yeah, this is a great question. So I will answer this question, and please, if there are any other questions or you need help debugging, I mean, there's 10 minutes left on the workshop, but I'll be around. I can be around for probably another 15 until 10:30 to answer questions, and I'll probably be around for the actual hackathon too. You can find me on Discord. I'll give the info there, but I just want to show one more thing that's even makes Next.js even more awesome is it's really easy to deploy this and host it on an actual website. So right now I'm running this on my local machine, right? Localhost 3000. So no one else can access this except for me on my computer. And of course, maybe you want to demo your application, you want the judges to see it, you want your friends to see it. And sometimes it's a really big headache. People spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to use AWS or Heroku to deploy your backend, deploy your front end. So with Next.js, you can do this in like less than 5 minutes. So they are owned by a company called Vercel. It is created by the same company. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to show you guys how quickly we can do this. I think there's 5 minutes left. So I'm going to create a new repository here. Next.js workshop. I'm going to make it like this and copy over the code. Let's just commit. Don't copy my commits, but what I want to do is this. Oh, copied the wrong one. Oh my gosh. Well, all right. Can I push? All right, let's see what's going on here. Yeah, sure. All right. So you put your code to GitHub. Apparently, I can't. I'm pretty bad at doing that. But so here's my repository. It's on GitHub. I'm gonna go to Vercel, create an account, yada yada yada, and create a new project. And what they're gonna prompt you to do is to link your GitHub account. So I've already done that, and I've linked only a select few repositories. So I'm gonna link the repository that I just made. I don't know why this screen looks so small. Can I make it bigger? Yes. So let me, Next.js. All right, let's add this one. Boom. And let's click it, import. We can skip creating a team. I'm going really fast, but I promise you can figure this out yourself. The only important thing, again, here, I talked about this earlier, is the environment variables. So these are secrets, right? These are not pushed to your GitHub repository. They're not pushed anywhere public. Only you have this information. So I'm going to copy over what this will be like safe on Vercel, or if you use Heroku, you have to do the same thing. AWS, it's very standard. So I'm going to copy over our environment variables. Boom, and boom. And then, whoops. And boom, and click deploy. I think we're good to go. So this will take like 2 or 3 minutes. And then just like that, your whole application, your API and your front end will be live on a public URL that everyone can use, the judges can use, your hackers can use. And even better is that because this is linked to your GitHub repo, it actually, like, every time I push a change to my main branch, this entire thing will run automatically and update that URL with your latest code changes. So it's like seamless. It takes like 2 minutes to set up. I said 5 minutes. It hasn't been 5 minutes yet, which is great. So we'll let this run, and I'll answer some questions. So how'd you know about finding a UI library for React, and how'd you know it would become useful? I have been doing front-end development for a really long time. I would say that there are a couple of really popular libraries for React. Probably the most popular one you'll hear of is Material UI. This is kind of based on Google's design language, and it's probably like the first choice that people would recommend. I think it's a pretty good library, and let me just show you some of what they have. Probably buttons. Yeah. So these are like kind of the material style buttons. And yeah, I think just in general, I would highly recommend using a component library. I mean, it's great to learn how to like style from scratch, but if you're looking to do something quickly, they give you style things that look nice kind of out of the box. So, a regular HTML button does not look this nice, but this just looks nicer. And they also have a lot of clear examples of how to do things. If you want to create like nice looking radio selects, if you want to create some sort of navigation, breadcrumbs, there's a lot of things that are just built out that you can leverage, and you can also style them your way. So it's not like all your applications will look the same as everyone else's. Definitely not, like these are all stylable. So you can change the color, you can change the size, but it's just giving you kind of a baseline to work off of. And then Sup Willie. And then personally, just to finish off that thought, Material UI is really popular. I found out about Chakra UI, I would say about 6 months ago. This library is pretty new, probably like 3 years old. And you can see I was actually inspired to create an Airbnb clone because they have an example of a Airbnb card on their site. And I would highly, highly recommend checking out Chatter UI if you have not, if you're using React and are looking for a component library. I think this library is very easy to use, very stylable. Examples are great. And they have some like modern features that Material UI doesn't have, like built-in dark mode, um, accessibility, things like that. They also have like, so just one example of something that you will not want to build yourself, but a component library provides for you, or modals. So you can see these things are called modals. Trust me, building this yourself would be a huge undertaking, but just, basically I can copy a bit of code and I'll have a modal. So yeah, would recommend component libraries, and in particular Chatter UI, which I used. And hopefully that helps. Before I answer this next question, which is a great question, let's check out Vercel. All right, that took about 2 minutes. And you can see, let's visit our site. So Hot North, this is public. So y'all can actually try this out. I don't know how to send, but it's hotnorth-nets-js-workshop. It's kind of long. Maybe someone can help me send this. But this is a site that we just built, and it's live. It's at a listings. I don't have a loading screen, so, or maybe I copied over. I probably copied over the Mongo environment variable wrong, I'm gonna guess. All right, well, in theory, this would work. I'm just gonna guess that I copied over an environment variable wrong, because nothing else in our code changed. But yeah, it's super easy. It's literally just gonna be, yeah, let's see what we did here. Huh. Well, not every demo. This demo is doing super well until now, but that's okay. Vercel is, highly recommend checking it out. You can actually see my other repo. It's also deployed on Vercel, the repo that we've been following, that I didn't just push this one. It's also deployed on Vercel, and this is a public URL. So this one works. I don't know why. I just went back. All right. How does Vercel compare to Netlify? So yeah, Netlify is a service that's very similar to Vercel. I would say for all intents and purposes, they're very, very similar, and differences are pretty minute. But because Vercel built Next.js, or they acquired, so it's the same open source, well, I don't know if they're open source, but it's the same company. So the integration with Next.js is a little better. So I would recommend Vercel. There is one catch, I think, is that this is actually just like Vercel will not work if you have a private repository. I think that they make you pay for hosting private repositories, but I think that most of everyone will be using public repositories. So that's just one catch. These are just two very similar services. Good question. I think Vercel is a little better. It's just a bit newer, but honestly, they're very similar. Well, the question, how do you go about theming applications you make and styling them in general? I would highly recommend, this is another good question. I think that one overlooked role in hackathons is the role of like a designer. I know that not too many designers will go to hackathons, but if you are able to find one on your team, or even just find someone on your team who is passionate about front-end design and UI and making applications look good, I think that's very important, to try and find a spread of skills. So if you have someone like that on your team, that is ideal. Otherwise, it's really just, I think design and UI is also something that can be practiced. It's not something that just comes naturally and, like, oh, like I was born artistic or was born with an eye for design. It's something that can be practiced and can be learned and just comes with experience. So I would recommend you to just try, styling an application as you build it, and, maybe like, again, the great thing about these component libraries is they kind of have examples as well. So if I go to a button, Um, you know, like these are very simple. Let me see if I can find a more involved example. Not sure if these have it. Yeah, so like these kind of avatars, um, you know, these are like common things, and then they kind of group it together with a bit of overlap, or they show examples of breadcrumbs for navigation, which is these are known as breadcrumbs, but there's like different ways to do it. Um, and then yeah, so like putting all of this together with some color, with some backgrounds, you really have like a design that starts coming together. So kind of a half answer, but you know, it's I would say hackathons, it's often overlooked. Design, styling, so having a spread of skills, and then it's also really fun for me to like design things, and it's like something that you can learn and practice over time. Cool. Are there any other questions? I will go through, I guess, the end of, I guess I have one more slide. So yeah, the code is all on this repo. And then if you want to learn more about Next.js, I pretty much just recommend going to their websites. They have a lot of documentation. Again, what you're going to be interested in is mostly API routes, but it's very well documented with examples all around. And then the other thing that might be useful is if you search for Next.js examples, uh, they have an entire repository here of full applications built using Next.js. So if you have something in mind that you want to do, or a technology you want to use, or maybe you want to use Tailwind, maybe you want to use, I don't know, whatever it is, GraphQL, chances are they have something related to it. These are usually pretty bare bones, but it's a pretty good starting point to see how they're doing something. So backends with middlewares, GraphQL, authentication, examples of blogs, you're working with CMS. So yeah, this is a great resource to help you get started, that you can kind of compare. If you have an idea, you can see if they have an example. And then, so yeah, my resources are Next.js official websites, their official examples, and then you can also peek my code if you would like. And then if you have questions over if you're looking to use Next.js and you have questions, I won't be around all weekend, but I should be around most of the weekend. So you can feel free to reach out on Discord. Oh my God. I think this is my Discord handle. I hope it's my Discord handle. And yeah, I'm more than happy to answer Next.js related questions, or any full stack, especially front end like React, but also Node.js, TypeScript, JavaScript, MongoDB, basically anything we use today. Connect. Yeah. I don't know what that means. Maybe you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or GitHub or whatever. Yeah, you can. Basically, my handle on every single site, LinkedIn included, is JZ Huang. I don't know if we share these slides. I guess we don't. But I think that is it. I think I'm supposed to tell you all also to fill out the poll. Is that right, Leon? Does it start the poll? Yeah, please fill this out, and Hat the North will be super happy. I hope I'm not missing anything. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and happy Hat North.